You won't believe this. HOA Karen actually called 911 on me just because I refused to leave my own property. Sounds crazy, right? But let me tell you exactly how it went down. It was a normal afternoon, and I was outside, minding my own business on my driveway. Suddenly, Karen stormed over, her arms crossed and eyes filled with anger. She didn't even say hello. Instead, she pointed straight at me and barked, "You need to leave." Now, I froze for a second. Leave? From my own property? I thought she was joking, but her expression told me she was dead serious. Calmly, I replied, "This is my home. I'm not going anywhere." That one sentence was enough to light the fire. Karen's face turned red. Her voice got louder, and I knew right then this was about to turn into something much bigger than just an argument. The silence between us felt heavier than the heat of the afternoon sun. I had just told her I wasn't leaving my own property, and for a split second, her jaw dropped as if she couldn't process the words. Then, like a switch being flipped, Karen's entire demeanor shifted. Her voice shot up, sharp and piercing, slicing through the quiet street. "You don't make the rules here," she screamed, jabbing her finger toward my chest, as though she could push me away with just her hand gestures. "This neighborhood has standards. You can't just stand around like this. People are watching. You're disturbing the peace." I blinked at her in disbelief. Disturbing the peace? I had been standing in my driveway, scrolling through emails on my phone, not bothering anyone. The only disturbance was her voice, echoing across the houses. A curtain from a nearby window moved slightly, and I realized neighbors were already starting to watch. Trying to keep calm, I said, "Karen, I'm literally on my property. I'm not hurting anyone. You can't tell me to leave." But those words only poured gasoline on the fire. Her face turned crimson, the veins in her neck popping as she shouted louder. She waved a stack of HOA papers in her hand, shoving them inches from my face. "You signed the agreement when you moved in. These are the rules. You have to respect them." I didn't even look at the papers. I'd seen this tactic before. Karen loved to flaunt rules that didn't exist or twist them into whatever she wanted. Calmly, I pushed her hand back and said, "Show me where it says I can't stand in my driveway." Her lips curled into a smile, but not a friendly one. It was the smug grin of someone who thought they had already won. She flipped through the pages, mumbling nonsense about community guidelines, but not once did she actually point to a single line that supported her outburst. By now, 2 more neighbors had stepped outside, pretending to water their lawns, but clearly curious. Phones appeared in their hands, and I knew they were recording. Karen noticed too, and instead of calming down, she escalated. She spun around dramatically and shouted toward the street, "He's refusing to comply. He's breaking the rules, and he won't leave." The neighbors just stared at her, confused. One of them whispered loud enough for me to hear, "Leave?" from his own house. A ripple of laughter broke out, and Karen's face twisted in humiliation. But instead of backing down, she doubled down. She pointed her finger at me like I was some kind of intruder. "You're trespassing. I'm the HOA president, and I'm ordering you to leave this property immediately." I couldn't help but laugh. Trespassing? On my own driveway? Karen, do you hear yourself? Her eyes widened, and for a moment, I thought she might actually lunge at me. Instead, she took a deep breath, pulled out her phone, and with a trembling hand, began to dial. I raised an eyebrow. "You're not seriously calling—" She pressed the phone to her ear, cutting me off. "Yes, Hello, this is an emergency. There's a man refusing to leave. He's creating a disturbance and threatening the safety of this neighborhood. The words rolled off her tongue like rehearsed lines from a play. My stomach twisted in disbelief. She was actually lying to the police, painting me as some dangerous stranger in front of everyone. I tried to interrupt. Karen, stop exaggerating. But she turned away, pacing the sidewalk, her voice growing louder for dramatic effect. He's aggressive. He's shouting at me. I don't feel safe. Please send someone quickly. The neighbors gasped, their phones recording every second. One of them even muttered, "This is insane." He hasn't even raised his voice. I felt anger rising inside me, but I forced myself to stay calm. I knew the last thing I should do was give her any ammunition. So I stood perfectly still, arms crossed, watching her spin this ridiculous tale. When she finally hung up, she smirked triumphantly, as though she had secured my downfall. Now we'll see who's right. The police are on their way. You're finished. I looked her in the eyes and said quietly, Karen, you just made a very big mistake. Her confidence wavered for just a second. She glanced at the neighbors, who were now openly laughing at her performance. But she shook it off, squared her shoulders, and snapped, You'll be the one embarrassed when they haul you away. Minutes felt like hours as we waited. Karen paced back and forth, muttering about how she was protecting the community. I stayed exactly where I was, calm, steady, refusing to give her the satisfaction of reacting. Every now and then, I caught her glancing nervously at the neighbors' phones, knowing full well her lies had been captured on camera. Finally, in the distance, I heard it, the faint wail of sirens. Karen's face lit up like a child on Christmas morning. She pointed dramatically at me again, shouting for everyone to hear, There, justice is coming for him. But deep down, I knew the real show was just about to begin. The sirens grew louder, echoing off the houses until the entire street seemed to vibrate with the sound. Karen straightened her back, smoothed her shirt, and lifted her chin, as if she were preparing to welcome royalty. To her, this was her moment. She had finally cornered me, finally brought authority to back her nonsense. I stayed put in my driveway, arms folded across my chest. My heart was pounding, but I forced myself to stay calm. I knew the truth was on my side. I knew I hadn't done a single thing wrong. Still, there was a knot in my stomach. Police showing up with flashing lights was never something to take lightly, especially when someone had already lied about you. The squad car pulled up fast, headlights cutting across the neighbors' lawns. Two officers stepped out, one tall and serious-looking, the other younger, scanning the scene with cautious eyes. Karen practically leapt toward them, waving her arms dramatically. "Officers! Over here! Over here!" she shouted, pointing at me like I was some wanted criminal. "That's him! He's trespassing, he's threatening me, and he refuses to leave." The officers exchanged a quick glance, but didn't react right away. They walked toward us slowly, their hands resting near their belts, cautious but not aggressive. I raised my voice just enough for everyone to hear. "Good evening, officers. Before she wastes any more of your time, let me make one thing clear. This is my home. This is my driveway, and I'm not trespassing." Karen spun around, her face twisted with rage. "He's lying. He doesn't follow the HOA rules. He's been disturbing the peace all afternoon. He's dangerous." One officer held up his hand. "Ma'am, calm down. We'll get both sides of the story." But Karen wouldn't stop. She pointed at me, her voice rising higher and higher. He mocked me. He threatened me. He refused to leave when I told him to. He's harassing me in my own neighborhood. The younger officer tilted his head. Wait, refused to leave from his own property? Karen froze for half a second, realizing how ridiculous that sounded. But instead of backing off, she doubled down. I'm the HOA president. I have the authority to remove him if he breaks the rules, and he is breaking the rules. The tall officer turned to me. Sir, do you have proof of residence here? Without a word, I pulled my wallet from my pocket and handed him my driver's license. My address was printed clearly in bold letters. I even gestured toward the house and added, if that's not enough, I can grab a utility bill from inside. The officer looked at the ID, then at me, then at the house. He nodded. That won't be necessary. Behind him, Karen's face dropped. The smug confidence melted into panic. No, you don't understand. He doesn't respect the community rules. That should count as trespassing. The younger officer raised an eyebrow. Ma'am, HOA rules are not criminal law. You can't call 911 because someone isn't following your guidelines. That sentence hit her like a punch. She stammered, her words tumbling out in a frantic mess. But he was aggressive. He scared me. He wouldn't leave when I asked him to. A neighbor finally stepped forward, holding up their phone. Officers, if you'd like, I recorded the whole thing. He was calm the entire time. She's the one who escalated. Another neighbor chimed in. Yeah, she was screaming at him. He never even raised his voice. Karen whipped around, glaring at them with pure hatred. You're all against me. You're taking his side. The tall officer sighed and turned back to her. Ma'am, making a false report to 911 is a serious offense. We responded here thinking there was a threat to your safety. What we see is a neighbor standing calmly on his own property and you yelling at him. Do you understand how this could be considered misuse of emergency services? Karen's jaw tightened. She opened her mouth to argue again, but the words seemed to get stuck in her throat. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. Not fear of me, but fear of consequences. I couldn't resist. With a small smirk, I said, Told you this was a big mistake. The younger officer actually cracked a smile at that. He shook his head slightly, as if he couldn't believe the nonsense he was witnessing. Karen tried one last desperate attempt. So what? You're just going to let him get away with this? You're not going to do anything? The tall officer crossed his arms. Ma'am, he hasn't broken any laws. He's on his property, he's not being disruptive, and multiple witnesses confirm your story doesn't match reality. The only problem we see here is your call to 911. The neighbors were whispering, recording, some even laughing quietly. Karen's face burned bright red. She looked around, realizing the very crowd she thought would support her was now mocking her. She muttered under her breath, This isn't over. You'll regret this. But the power in her voice was gone. The bravado had cracked, and all that remained was humiliation. The officers gave her one final warning. Ma'am, if you continue to misuse emergency services, there will be legal consequences. This is your only warning. Then they turned to me, their tones softening. Sorry about the trouble, sir. You're free to carry on. And just like that, the police walked back to their car, leaving Karen standing alone in the middle of the street, trembling with anger and shame. I looked at her one last time, calm and steady. You wanted the police involved, Karen. Now you got them. How'd that work out for you? Her lips tightened, but she didn't answer. She stormed off toward her house, muttering curses under her breath as the neighbors continued to film. What she thought would be my downfall had just turned into her most humiliating defeat. And deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of Karen's downfall. The red and blue lights faded as the squad car rolled away, but the tension lingered in the air like smoke after a fire. Karen stood frozen at the edge of my driveway, her fists clenched so tight her knuckles turned white. She had expected a parade in her honor, officers hauling me off in handcuffs while the neighbors cheered. Instead, she was left standing alone, humiliated in front of the very people she claimed to protect. The crowd of neighbors didn't disperse right away. In fact, more people had come outside after hearing the sirens, curious about the drama. Some whispered, others chuckled, and a few openly pointed their phones at her, recording her every move. Karen's eyes darted from one lens to another, and I could see the panic rising in her chest. She knew this wasn't just a neighborhood embarrassment. This was the kind of moment that went viral. I broke the silence first. Well, Karen, you wanted the whole neighborhood's attention. Looks like you got it. A ripple of laughter passed through the crowd. Karen's face flushed deeper, her lips pressed into a thin, trembling line. She snapped back, her voice shaking, but loud enough for everyone to hear. This isn't funny. He's dangerous. You're all blind to it. But the more she shouted, the less anyone believed her. A neighbor across the street, Mr. Lawson, who rarely spoke to anyone, stepped forward and shook his head. Karen, I've lived here for 20 years. He's one of the calmest people on this block. You're the one screaming in people's faces. That earned another round of murmurs from the crowd. Karen whipped around, glaring at him like she could burn holes through his skin. Don't you dare take his side. I'm the HOA president, and I have the authority. I cut her off, my voice calm but steady, loud enough to carry. Authority doesn't mean you get to abuse people, Karen. Authority doesn't mean you can twist the rules, call 911, and waste everyone's time just because your ego got bruised. Her jaw dropped, but before she could answer, another neighbor chimed in. This time it was Mrs. Patel, who lived 2 doors down. She held up her phone. I have the whole thing recorded. If you really think you're in the right, I'll be happy to share this with the entire HOA board. That hit her harder than anything else. Karen's eyes widened, and for the first time all evening, she seemed to lose her voice. Her mouth opened, then closed again, like she was trying to find the right words, but coming up empty. I stepped closer, lowering my voice just enough that only the nearby crowd could hear. You wanted to play the victim. But tonight, the whole neighborhood saw the truth. Karen shook her head violently, as if refusing to accept it. Then she pointed at me again, her finger trembling. This isn't over. I'll make sure you regret this. You think one little stunt makes you untouchable? Just wait. The crowd groaned collectively. It wasn't defiance anymore. It was desperation. Every threat she made only dug her deeper into the hole. One neighbor laughed openly. Karen, give it up. You just got schooled in front of the cops. Maybe it's time to sit this one out. That comment stung. Her face contorted, and I thought for a second she might actually break down in tears. But instead, she did what Karen always did. She doubled down, even in defeat. She spun around on her heel, stormed across the street, and slammed her front door so hard the windows rattled. The silence she left behind was almost comical. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then, like a dam breaking, laughter erupted. People shook their heads, shared videos with each other, replayed clips right there on the sidewalk. Mr. Lawson chuckled and said, "That's going viral tonight." Guaranteed, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My hands were still shaking, though I kept them tucked into my pockets so no one could see. The truth was, as ridiculous as it had been, Karen's call could have gone very differently. One wrong move, one misunderstanding, and I might not have been standing there free. That thought chilled me, even as the neighbors congratulated me for keeping calm. Mrs. Patel patted my shoulder. "You handled that perfectly. Most people would have lost their temper, but you stood your ground. That's why everyone here respects you, and why nobody believes Karen anymore." Her words meant more than I expected. For months, Karen had acted like she spoke for the whole neighborhood, like she was the voice of authority. But tonight, in front of everyone, she had shown her true colors. And for once, the community wasn't buying it. As the crowd began to thin, a few neighbors lingered, still chatting about what had just happened. I overheard someone say, "We should bring this up at the next HOA meeting. She can't keep abusing her position like this." Another added, "Maybe it's time for new leadership." That caught my attention. Maybe this wasn't just a win for me. Maybe this was the beginning of the end for Karen's reign of terror. I stood there for a moment longer, staring at her house across the street. The blinds were drawn, but I could feel her watching, stewing in anger and humiliation. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost, because deep down, I knew Karen wasn't the type to let something like this go. She thrived on control, and tonight she had lost it completely. That meant she'd be back. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week, but soon. And when she returned, she'd be twice as desperate, twice as reckless. Still, as I finally stepped inside my own home, I couldn't help but smile. Tonight, for the first time, Karen's power had cracked. She had called 911 to try to ruin me, and ended up ruining herself instead. And while I didn't know what she would try next, I knew one thing for certain. The neighborhood would never look at her the same way again. The next morning, the neighborhood felt different. The air was lighter, almost buzzing with whispers and quiet laughter. People waved at me from their porches, something they rarely did before. It was like last night had flipped a switch. The community wasn't under Karen's spell anymore. I poured myself a coffee, stepped out onto the porch, and sure enough, there she was, Karen, standing in her driveway with her phone pressed to her ear, pacing like a caged animal. She wasn't yelling this time, but her sharp gestures told me everything I needed to know. She was already plotting her next move. I could practically hear her voice from across the street. "Yes, this resident is a problem. We need to enforce stricter rules. No, I don't care what the police said last night." I shook my head. Even after humiliating herself in front of the entire block, she still couldn't admit she was wrong. But what she didn't realize was that the tide had turned. By mid-afternoon, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Mrs. Patel and Mr. Lawson, each holding their phones. They exchanged quick glances before Mrs. Patel spoke. "We've been talking with the neighbors. A lot of people want change. And after last night, we think we have enough support to call for a vote." "A vote?" I asked. Mr. Lawson nodded. "To remove Karen as HOA president. The words hit like thunder. For years, Karen had clung to that title like it was a crown. She flaunted it, weaponized it, used it to bully and control. And now, after one reckless 911 call, the very people she lorded over were preparing to take it away. I didn't even have to think twice. Count me in. That evening, the plan spread like wildfire. Text chains lit up, neighbors knocked on doors, and by sunset, almost the entire block was buzzing with one goal: dethrone Karen. But Karen, of course, sensed something was wrong. She stomped across the street and banged on my door, her face twisted in rage. When I opened it, she didn't waste a second. You think you're clever, don't you? Turning everyone against me, recording me, humiliating me in front of the police. I leaned casually against the door frame, keeping my voice even. I didn't turn anyone against you, Karen. You did that all by yourself. Her eyes narrowed, and her voice dropped to a hiss. You're going to regret this. Before I could answer, a voice called out from the sidewalk. Regret what, Karen? The truth? It was Mrs. Patel again, this time with half a dozen neighbors standing behind her. They had phones in their hands, some recording, others scrolling through group chats that had exploded with clips from the night before. Karen spun around, flustered. What is this? A witch hunt? No, Mr. Lawson said firmly. It's accountability. Something you've avoided for too long. Karen's face drained of color. She opened her mouth, but the words wouldn't come. She turned back toward me, her expression flickering between fury and desperation. For the first time, she looked small. Not the untouchable queen of the HOA, but just a neighbor who had finally been exposed. The following week, the HOA meeting was packed like never before. Usually only a handful of residents showed up, but this time every seat was filled. Phones were out, people were ready. Karen walked in, trying to act confident, holding her binder of rules like a shield. But the moment she stood at the podium, the room erupted with murmurs. She tried to speak, tried to control the narrative, but every time she raised her voice, someone raised their phone higher. Then Mrs. Patel stood up, cleared her throat, and played the video. The entire room watched as Karen screamed, waved papers, and finally called 911, painting me as a dangerous trespasser, only to be exposed by the police minutes later. The silence afterward was deafening. Karen's voice cracked. That's out of context. He provoked me. You don't understand the stress I was under. But no one bought it. A resident in the back shouted, You lied to the police. Another added, You wasted their time and embarrassed this whole neighborhood. And then the words that sealed her fate. We want a vote. The vote happened right there. Hands shot up, one after another, until it was undeniable. Karen was out, removed, stripped of the title she clung to so desperately. She stood frozen at the podium, trembling, her eyes darting from face to face, as though she might find someone, anyone, to defend her. But no one did. The very people she bullied for years had finally stood together, and just like that, her reign was over. After the meeting, neighbors gathered outside, the mood electric. People shook my hand, thanked me for standing up, laughed about how quickly Karen's lies unraveled. For the first time in a long time, the street felt like a community again. As I walked home, I glanced across the street at Karen's house. Her blinds were drawn tight, her car parked crooked in the driveway. She was hiding now, a shadow of the person who once strutted around barking orders. I should have felt pity, maybe even guilt. But instead, I felt something else. Relief. She had finally been held accountable. And deep down, I knew it was only because I refused to back down that night. Karen had called 911 to ruin me. But in the end, she ruined herself. And that was the last time anyone ever let HOA Karen push them around.